So let's get started, and apologies for a slightly delayed start. We were waiting for one of our speakers to finish another webinar that she was moderating, but she's glad to say she's with us now. Our technical checks have been done, and I'm here to welcome you all. So let me start by asking you to imagine a child born today in Lagos or Jakarta or Milan or wherever. By the time she starts high school, the climate in and around her city will already have shifted in measurable ways. The decisions we make now and the science we provide to policymakers will shape the world that she inherits. That's why today's conversation about expert review is so urgent. Indeed, IPCC procedures state that the expert review process that we will talk about should be objective, open, and transparent, with a wide circulation that aims to involve as many independent experts as possible in the IPCC process, seeking a range of views, expertise, and geographical representation. And this is where the Inter-Academy Partnership, or IAP, can help. Hello, welcome everybody to this webinar on how to participate as an expert reviewer in the first draft of the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Cities. My name is Peter McGrath. I'm the coordinator of IAP in the Secretariat Office in Trieste, Italy, and I'm your moderator today. This webinar is being brought to you by the Inter-Academy Partnership in collaboration with the IPCC Focal Point for Italy, and it's the second in this series of webinars that aim to provide interested experts with information on IPCC processes. Just to highlight that IAP is a global network of academies of science, medicine, and engineering with some 150 members from around the globe. IAP works with its member academies to provide independent expert advice on issues relating to science, technology, and health. Our partner for this webinar is the IPCC Focal Point for Italy. So let me present Anna Pirani. As well as being IPCC National Focal Point for Italy, Anna is a senior scientist and director of the program on predicting socio and economic outcomes at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, or CMCC, in Venice. Her work focuses on climate risk assessment, considering multi-hazard risk, transboundary and cascading risks, possible climate futures, and science policy interface. She provides scientific support to the Italian Ministry of the Environment and Energy Security and for climate change negotiations at the UNFCCC, the G20, and the G7. We only have two speakers today, so let me introduce the other one, is Andrew Okem. Andrew is the head of science of the IPCC Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit. Prior to this, he worked as a climate change governance and adaptation expert with the International Water Management Institute and was a science officer with the IPCC Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit during the 6th assessment cycle. Of course, we are now in the 7th assessment cycle. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the IAP YouTube channel shortly. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. I see very quickly we have some 80 or 90 participants, so it'd be good to get to know who you are, where you're from. And we also intend to open up for questions from you participants, so please be ready to put those in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to them. And at this point, I'll pass the microphone to Andrew for our first speaker. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Peter, for the introduction. I will try and share my screen, and I hope you can see my presentation. Good now?
Okay, yes, that's better. Go ahead.
Sure. All right, greetings everyone, and thanks for extending the invitation to be part of this webinar. So I will quickly take you through a quick overview of the IPCC so that we have much time dedicated to the expert review process, which is the main reason why we are here, and then have more time for question and answer. So my presentation is not a detailed presentation on IPCC, but a quick overview. So first, what is the role of the IPCC? Its role is to assess on a comprehensive and objective basis, open and transparent as well, the scientific, technical, and socioeconomic information that is relevant to understand the scientific basis of the risk of human-induced climate change, its potential impacts and options for adapting and mitigating climate change. So the work of IPCC, it's important to ensure that the key assessments are underpinned by traceable accounts. They are underpinned by solid evidence that the work of the IPCC is policy relevant, not policy prescriptive. That means that the IPCC does not tell policymakers the actions they need to take, but rather produces an assessment of a range of policy options that policymakers then adopt relevant to their own context. And the reports are comprehensive, covering multiple perspectives and views. And that is where, as Anna will cover later, the role of the expert review process is very important. And as IPCC, we prioritize inclusive, respective working environment. So this is a quick overview of the structure of the IPCC. So when we talk about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the panel itself refers to the 195 governments who are members of the IPCC. And these governments work with the IPCC through the national focal points. So when the panel meets, it's the meeting of the 195 governments. The day-to-day activities of the IPCC is undertaken through the Secretariat and the respective working group technical support unit. So as you can see here, there are three working groups. Working group 1 deals with the physical basis of climate change, the physical science basis. Working group 2, where I'm based, focuses on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And then working group 3 deals with mitigation of climate change. We also have the Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories that produces the methodology report for greenhouse gas accounting. And under each of the working group and the TFI, there is the technical support unit, for which I'm based in the working group 2 technical support unit, as I mentioned. The writing of the IPCC report itself is done by scientists and experts who are nominated from around the world by IPCC national focal points as well as observer organizations, and they are selected by the respective bureaus of the working group or the TFI, who are then involved in the writing of the report. During the writing process, the report is available for expert review, and that is where we are now with the special report on climate change and cities, which the expert review, the registration opened yesterday. In addition to the authors, we have review editors, and their role specifically is ensuring that all comments that have been given by experts are considered by the authors when they are responding to the expert review comments. This is a quick overview of the 6th assessment cycle, which has been one of the busiest. So during this cycle, the IPCC produced 3 special reports, the one on oceans and cryosphere, the report on climate change and land, and finally, the special report on global warming of 1.5. This is in addition to the report of the 3 working groups, as well as the synthesis report, which brings together all the reports of the 6th assessment cycle. And on this slide, giving you a quick overview in terms of some of the key numbers during the 6th assessment cycle. You can see here that for working group 1, 2, and 3, the number of authors, the number of papers that are cited, as well as the number of expert review comments which were given for each of the working group report. So we're looking forward to receiving your expert review comment on the special report on climate change and cities. I will take you through quickly how an IPCC report is produced. So at the beginning of each IPCC cycle, which typically lasts between 5 to 7 years, the panel, after electing the Bureau, comes together to agree on the product of that particular cycle. For this cycle, we have just one special report, the Special Report on Climate Change and Cities, which was already agreed to in the sixth assessment cycle, but the panel decided that the writing itself needs to be done in the seventh assessment cycle. So in this cycle, we have the special report on climate change and cities, some methodology reports, as well as the report for each of the respective working groups. And in addition, working group 2 will be updating the 1994 technical guideline. So once the panel agree on the work product of an assessment cycle, then there is a call that is issued for experts who will come together to scope the outline of the given report. So the call for nomination goes out. Observer organizations as well as IPCC national focal points nominate their respective experts. These are accepted by the respective working group and bureau for that report. They select the experts who go into a scoping meeting, produce a scoping outline that goes to the panel for their consideration and agreement. And once they agree on the outline, another call is issued for the authors who will be involved in the preparation of this assessment report. The nomination again goes to the respective working group. The Bureau consider the nomination and select the authors. And once that is done, the authors meet in the first lead author meeting where they unpack the outline, consider in terms of the different sections, how they will structure the narrative, and also allocate responsibilities. And that gives them the opportunity to prepare an internal draft, which then goes out for a review by a selection of experts. And once that is done, during the second lead author meetings, the authors work together, meet in person, and start working towards the preparation of the first order draft. For the special report on climate change and cities, that is the stage where we are now, where the first order draft is being finalized for experts to review. Once that review comments go out, the authors receive the comments, they consider it, work on it in revising the draft, and then prepare the second order draft for review by government and experts, and also the first draft of the summary for policymakers. Again, it goes out for expert review, and the authors consider the expert review comment, prepare the final draft as well as the summary for policymakers, which goes back this time around only to governments for their review. Once that review is done, the panel comes together at an approval session where they go through the summary for policymakers line by line, and they approve the outline, they approve the summary for policymakers, and then accept the underlying report. And finally, the product then goes for publication. So in the seventh assessment cycle, as I said, we have now the agreed product for the seventh assessment cycle, the seventh assessment report for the respective working groups have been scoped. The authors have been selected, and that is where we are now preparing for the first lead author meeting, which is planned for the first half of December. This is the outline for the special report on climate change and cities. We've gone through LAM 1 and LAM 2 already. And as you can see here, we are now at a stage where we've opened the call for registration for experts to register to review this report. For the seventh assessment cycle, the timeline is yet to be agreed as the panel has not agreed on the entire timeline for the cycle. So a quick overview of the special report on climate change and cities. This has 5 chapters. The first chapter focuses on cities in the context of climate change. It also focuses on the framing of the report. Chapter 2 is about cities in a changing climate, considering trends, challenges, and opportunities. Chapter 3 is about actions and solutions to reduce urban risks and emissions. Chapter 4 is about how to facilitate and accelerate change. And finally, Chapter 5 is looking at solutions by city types and regions. So as I said, this report has gone through some progress already. We have about 100 authors plus review editors from 56 countries. The first lead author meeting was held in Osaka in Japan. The zero order draft has been finalized. We met in Mombasa in July for the second lead author meeting. And then now the first order draft is ready for expert review. So what are the ways of engaging in IPCC? One of the common ways is the expert review, which is why we are here. You can help as experts in terms of reviewing the draft report. Experts help with scoping. As I mentioned previously, you can be involved in as an author, but the process of being engaged as an author for this cycle, it's already over with the selection of authors for the 7th assessment cycle. You can also write reports because IPCC, the work of the IPCC is not about producing new papers, it's assessing the body of evidence that is already available. So as you work as scientists, as you produce your report, you are contributing to the work of the IPCC because the knowledge that you produce is then taken by the authors who will then assess that publication in the report. And finally, helping to organize outreach and stakeholder engagement, such as the one that we are having here today. So steps to become an expert review, which is what Anna is going to cover in more detail. Anyone can register as an expert reviewer. Registration opened already yesterday. The review period will open on the 17th of October and will close on the 12th of December. You'll be required to submit your expert review comment via the official IPCC template, and all comments will be considered and receive feedback from the authors. Once the report is published, this response to the review comments will be published as well. So with that, I will end my presentation here and then hand over to Anna to take us through the next part of this session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That's, I hope my more detailed overview of the review process will help concretize, shall we say, how you can engage and what the review is about. So I'm going to dive right in. What makes a good review? And I think many of us on the call are accustomed to reviewing papers, reports, and improving quality and looking at scientific consistency and so on. I guess in the IPCC context, there is an added dimension that we're reviewing an assessment rather than just a review or a usual scientific or technical document. So my sort of suggestions are really targeting the IPCC review itself. So first, just to say why is it really important to review an IPCC report? So you heard from Andrew about the selection of the authors and the author's work. One thing that's quite remarkable in the assessment by the IPCC is how these quite small teams come together internationally, covering very different disciplines into these chapters and start processing and digesting the very broad and increasingly broad body of knowledge. We need to ensure that the chapters fairly reflect this entire body of literature. And so this is where experts from around the world are needed to support this work of the authors. So they do their best. They are dedicating a lot of time and effort. As you know, they're actually volunteers in this process. And I think it's fair to say that the success of the IPCC very much depends on the expert community as a whole contributing and delivering, shall we say, the policy relevant information as a result in an effective and robust way. So you're really, I hope, can see how you're part of this process and your sort of contribution is actually quite crucial. What is in it for you? The contribution that reviewers make, the more structured and constructive they are, will actually help guide shaping the reports and the chapters therein. And also, if you're not an author and you haven't been an author before, it's a good process by which you see how the IPCC assessment is developed. So you gain experience in that, and it certainly lays the foundation for contributing as an author perhaps in the future. You generally, being involved in the IPCC, you generally do expand your scientific network. And then there's the aspect that basically it's a much lighter workload than committing to be an author. And obviously, you may have decided, or perhaps you weren't selected if you did nominate, but also you may have decided that the workload was too much to juggle with your own responsibilities. So this is really an effective way of still being part of this process. And again, back to the concrete suggestions and guidance that you provide, sometimes if you pick up some gaps perhaps in the content, or you have a methodological suggestion whereby your expertise is kind of complementary to those in the author teams who obviously can't cover everything, you may be invited by the authors to be a contributing author. And so there you would be invited to submit your expert, whether it's text or it could be in some sort of synthesis of, it could be a figure, it could be some tables showing some information. And there you would be cited as a contributing author. And obviously you'd see your work in the document itself, which is wonderful. Just to flag that it's not about your own piece of work, but it's more your expert contribution. So it's helping that synthesis of the body of literature. So I would just caution it not to have high expectations of seeing only your paper cited, but your work as an expert will certainly be reflected if you're a contributing author. And expert reviewers are not unnoticed. So the more effective this contribution is, the more positive feedback there is after, I guess, going forwards, thanks to the authors recognizing your support. The workload is clearly less than the authorship, and also you shouldn't feel like you need to read the whole report to be a reviewer. There are many hundreds of pages, these documents. So when the draft becomes available on the review system, one recommendation I would have is to look at the outline very carefully and decide where you're best engaged in this process. So you may just select a paragraph. There could be a subsection that is really speaking to your area of expertise, or you could cover a whole chapter. And all comments, so your input is by procedural definition, is taken into account in the work of the IPCC. So authors in the chapter teams have to take into account all review comments. And this becomes a transparent process whereby they become available after publications. One thing you should be aware of is that review comments are not anonymous. So you are participating in this transparent process. So you would register as yourself and expertise. So your name and affiliation and country of residence are published. And obviously that's a good thing. And your contribution will be listed in the annex that accompanies the report, and it lists all authors and expert reviewers. In terms of when to review, there are 2 times, as Andrew has explained, where you can interject into this drafting process. The first is the first order draft, which is where we're coming up to now. And then there is the second order draft. And I would here recommend to consider engaging here now rather than postponing your input until there's a more mature draft, because essentially here you have, I think, more influence potentially, and the second order draft will be much more consolidated and mature and less likely to take into account new directions. And so really this is the time to bring in views and ideas to help the authors. In terms of efficacy, I think, and I'm going to come to this to explain a little bit what the IPCC assessment is doing in terms of assessing the body of knowledge and then communicating that assessment. So you may know the structure of these reports. There is a chapter, and then there's an executive summary that summarizes all the subsections of a chapter. And here, these are where the assessment statements are. And so when you're looking at the review, it's important to see whether the high-level statements that come from the topic you're focused on, if they reflect well the more technical language that's in the actual chapter itself, in the subsection. So I'll come back to this again, but you'll see it's like a a technical elaboration of what the main body of evidence is. And then finally, there's an assessment that's made. And this then goes to the executive summary. So looking at this robust traceability and underpinned statements is important. And then a little bit what I was saying before, be very constructive. So it's not a question of saying, oh, this isn't right and this is missing. You can imagine actually the authors receive hundreds, if not thousands of comments in this process. So the more concrete you are and the more propositive you are, like the constructiveness is very, very helpful. And then less is more. So again, you see that they'll receive thousands of comments. They're obliged to look at all of them and respond to all of them. So really the advice is not to send in minor editorial comments, because there's the technical team, which Andrew is leading the science team for the city special report. And there's an editorial process, a copy edit process. So focus really on your expertise area and where are the gaps? How could these be addressed, and what kind of evidence is available that might not be in the author's view at the moment? And you could also think about how, well, one is the consistency of within the chapter of the final statements, but you may also see by looking at the outline that there are topics that cut across. So you may have an area which is very, very relevant through multiple chapters. And so you could try and have a look at the consistency between chapters. And this would, I think this is an incredible help and contribution to make. So what it looks like, it's a bit, I don't know, it's not exactly that modern, but you basically get Excel spreadsheets, and Andrew, you're going to correct me if and there's something new and revised. There might be a new portal, so you'll correct me on this, but basically there's a form where you will select the chapter and then you identify, you'll see the draft has page numbers and line numbers, and you sort of go through and mark where is the comment fitting to. And then what the authors get is the spreadsheet all compiled, and they'll have all the comments, they'll see who it's coming from, and that enables them to follow up in some cases and discuss. I think it's important that there is a transparency here. And the author team will respond to every comment. There are some formulaic responses, like this has been noted, because it might be that, oh, I think this is really important, and this is noted. But where there's a more substantive comment, the authors will explain how they take it into account, and then this ought to be reflected basically in the second order draft eventually. And this becomes public once the report is published. So when the summary for policymakers is approved with governments, at that point, all the material becomes public on the IPCC website. And so actually, if you go back to past reports, you should be able to navigate the web pages to find not only the final product, but also all the iterations previously, so the drafts and the review comments. One critical sort of thing, as I said at the beginning, that this is an IPCC assessment. And so I wanted just to touch on how this assessment is communicated in the IPCC. So there is a use of an uncertainty language, a calibrated uncertainty language. Now, just to differentiate between a review, which would summarize the current state of knowledge in the literature, the assessment goes beyond, and it says, what is our level of understanding? And the authors communicate that using this calibrated uncertainty language. And remembering what the assessment is for, it's a mechanism for governments and wider policy and stakeholders to ask the scientific community to explain what do we know on the questions that we need to know about to be able to go on and implement policy development and so on. So the assessment is saying, well, here is the knowledge on this topic that was agreed with governments in the contents. And then we think that there is this confidence in these statements. And it's based on that confidence and understanding of the likelihood in some cases where possible that this becomes an incredibly valuable mechanism for the science to policy interface. So it's guided by policy relevance. It's not a scientific decision what to discuss. And it needs to be neutral. So the whole point of the assessment is to say, here is what we know. including those things that are different from the main body of literature. There might be new views, new findings, or there could be a range of options. And so it's then given to governments and they will decide what should be done or shouldn't be done. The language in the IPCC has to be neutral. It can talk about causality, of course. So something will cause something else in terms of a physical system, perhaps. But the point is not to be policy prescriptive. So an example is, in terms of climate model results, the review will report on all the range of results. It could show figures showing the different outcomes. And then the assessment will look at these outcomes and see, we can trust this, or there's this part of the finding is not so robust at the moment, based on also other lines of evidence. So it's an expert assessment of the literature. And it's the job of the authors to do that. So it's not to propagate their own expertise, their own point of view. They're acting on behalf of everyone, I suppose, to transmit this information. And here, without going into very large detail, but I leave it in the slides, including a citation, a couple of references where you can look in more detail at what this calibrated language is. The main one is it's called confidence. It looks at confidence. It says a statement has high confidence or low confidence. It's qualitative, and it's built on a matrix of information that the authors build, looking at both the evidence, the type of evidence and so on, and the agreement amongst the different studies. And so it's not a sort of a one-to-one mathematical formula to derive which confidence statement you use. It's an expert-based judgment. In some cases, you can make a quantitative piece of information on the likelihood of something happening. And this would be tends to be based on numerical information, but also there is likelihood is also built from expert judgment and different types of expert elicitation approaches. And just to show you how these assessment conclusions sort of come together, here I'm showing you some examples from the Summary for Policymakers, and it shows you different types of concluding statements at the highest level of an IPCC report. What it shows is different statements from the bottom going up of evidence on a specific topic, and it comes from the chapter elaboration. And then there is actually here a statement of fact, because combining this information in the case of human influence on the atmosphere, ocean, and land, the authors are able to say that it's unequivocal. There is no doubt that this human influence has caused the atmosphere, and it builds on all of this evidence. And obviously, this language is approved with governments, and it needs to be very, very robust from a scientific perspective and backed up by the evidence. So I mentioned that chapters build this traceable account to make these final statements. And when you look at a chapter, you should look critically to see whether it's focused to serve this purpose. So it should say, what do we know since the last assessment? Why does it matter? What's our current understanding, and how confident are we about this, about these conclusions? And the authors need to think about this confidence now, because the earlier they start hypothesizing, building this, it's a very difficult process for authors to make and commit their expert judgment here. It's very hard to build it later. And so here is where they will put out onto the table for you their first draft, and you can help them here. And then you'll see that a report is published based on, many hundreds of thousands, or many thousands, tens of thousands of publications. And then this process to distill key statements that make it up to the Summary for Policymakers in a transparent, rigorous way. And maybe for the sake of time, I won't explain this in vast detail, but you'll have the slides. You're welcome to look at them later. But essentially here you see this traceability playing out in an example of a chapter. You see a subsection and the structure of we know this since the AR5, and then the increased evidence. And in summary, we can have a level of confidence in this particular process regarding cyclones and storms. And then from there, the final statements from the section go into this executive summary of the chapter. And then there's a very direct link, shall we say, between these two pieces in the chapter. And then the executive summary is what underpins a statement in the summary for policymakers. And then from there, you'll have a whole different set of statements coming in from many parts of the report. And then we build the headline statements that are really the key takeaways, very, very impactful findings from the IPCC process that governments will use. So here's just a couple of points about what is an effective input to the science policy interface. It helps you look critically at how the chapters are coming along. They need to be rigorous, transparent, and balanced. They need to be very clear, not only in the language, but in the traceable accounts of the assessment. It needs to be objective, so not policy prescriptive. And there needs to be an explanation of the expert judgment, shall we say, that comes into this. And there needs to be focus and, you know, the sort of more quality of the document itself. It should be focused. Figures should be very clearly, you know, with an intent of what they're trying to communicate. And the review is critical here so that it really helps build this effective input by the report. And just to conclude, I give you a flavor of what the last IPCC report was all about, in the sense that it built these three important documents published in 2021, 2022. You see the author teams that were underneath these reports. They come from all over the world, but still, considering they're small teams, and you see the body of literature, the citations that these reports carry, tens and tens of thousands of papers and documents. And even more so, you see the body of review that fed into this process over a 2.5-3 year process of drafting these reports. So it's an important process. It really, really strengthens the report, but then also be careful not to be over prolific in the number of review comments. Really carefully develop targeted and effective review comments. So I stop there, and thank you very much for this opportunity, Peter, to discuss these things.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Andrew, for that overview. I'm glad to note we've got the chat open and people have started to introduce themselves while you were speaking. Maybe you haven't had a chance to look, but we've got about 100 participants listening in. I noticed at one point in the chat, somebody from Algeria was followed by somebody from Zimbabwe. So right from A to Z, and many others in between. We've got a good representation from all the continents. I'll open the floor for the Q&A in a moment. I'll dive into the questions there. You answered one or two of my questions, especially Anna. I was going to ask how long these first author drafts are, but I think I saw it could be 2,000 pages.
No, well, I mean, maybe Andrew has a better estimate. The special report on cities is a much more focused document. It's not as big as a major assessment report. Maybe, Andrew, you have an estimate, but it's not thousands and thousands.
Yeah, it's only 5 chapters.
5, okay. So
Yeah.
100 or 200 pages, would that be more realistic or something like that? But
Yeah,
the advice anyway was to focus in on your specific interests, to review the contents and focus in, so rather than reviewing the whole report. Okay, so let me jump into the Q&A. Some people have been asking, are the presentations going to be available? Yes, certainly they will be. The whole video that is being recorded will be on our IAP website, on our YouTube channel, as soon as we can manage to do that. I'm trying to find the first question amongst the sort of introductions.
I see there's a question from Shirley from Bolivia. And if I can help you, Peter, because it is there's lots of messages coming in. It's a question about where all the material is, where they, you know, if you want to participate, where you find all the material. Maybe Andrew's best place to explain.
Yeah, so if you want to register, I've put a link in the response to one of the questions in the Q&A. So there's a link to register. So for now, it's only registration that is open. The report itself is not available for review. It will be available from the 17th of October. So once you register, then you have access to additional information about the review process. I don't know if that answers the questions or...
So we should certainly get that link for putting yourself forward as a reviewer. We'll get that in the chat as soon as we can.
I've already added it as in response to one of the Q&A, so the link is there.
So
I can
I'm
put
not
it in
sure
the
if
chat.
everybody sees that. You might have just replied to the one person. So if
Okay.
it goes in the chat, then everybody will see it.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat and then to everybody.
Yeah.
I can
And
do that.
then from Diksha Katyal, there is could you give some details on the selection criteria for the reviewers?
Yeah, up to Andrew. Would you like to respond, or I can respond?
If I can respond to that, and then you can fill in as well if I miss anything. So who is an expert is loosely defined, so there isn't a specific set criteria. As Anna mentioned, we are looking for diversity of views or diversity of perspective. So you just need to be able to demonstrate that you have some kind of expertise that is relevant to be able to add perspective to the draft report. So typically they ask for some information like your publication. You don't necessarily need to have publication because some people who work in civil society sector, for example, would not typically be engaged in publishing academic papers. Just a basic demonstration of some relevance to being able to provide review feedback. So as I said in the chat, most registrations are typically approved, except where there are concerns about maybe some bots are not real human beings registering to have access to the draft report, because the reports are confidential. They are published at the end of the cycle when everything when the final report is approved and published. The drafts are made available, but during the preparation process, they are confidential and only accessible to those who have registered as expert reviewers.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And I think that probably answers Diana Onyango's question about eligibility requirements to be a reviewer. So a similar sort of question. And the same Messeret, how are expert reviewers vetted, how to get involved, The link I see has just gone in the chat. Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, I think if you follow that link, you reach immediately this registration form, and it's very, I just want to emphasize what Andrew said, that it's very open. I think, you need to have some background that's relevant. It's not really a process that can be taking in views from everyone and anyone, because obviously you see the volume of work that's involved in putting this together by the authors. So, there are just questions about what type of work the topics you're working on. If you're not a scientist, or if you're a practitioner, or if you're a communicator, you could also be a student. And, as long as there's some, enough to be able to make an evaluation of the reports from these different perspectives, the scientific, the communicability part. Policymakers are invited also, because it needs to be able to be speaking to their needs, that audience there. Yeah, I think the process has become very, very open in the last cycles. There's a real appreciation of the different types of expertise that are needed to be brought in, not just a purely academic basis.
Okay, yeah, and then another question from Tabil. How many reviewers usually take part in such an assessment? Maybe Andrew, you have an idea from previous ones?
There is no limit to the number. I think Anna showed in one of the slides, which I also showed, we received thousands of comments from hundreds of experts from different parts of the world. So the number is growing, but as Anna mentioned, it's also a challenge because authors need to consider all the review comments when they are revising the draft of the report. So there isn't a limit to how many people can register as an expert reviewer of a given report.
Okay, thank you. Typographical errors. I'm looking for more questions. Please feel free.
There is one from Leila about sending a CV. So Leila, you don't send your CV. The link that was put in the chat, you just need to click that link and it will ask for some information. You complete it, submit it, and then you'll get notification if your registration for the review is approved.
Okay, and I think another question from Habiba, the same thing. How do we get registered? That's use that link in the chat, and we'll make sure that that's available. We'll write a quick summary on the IAP website and make sure that link is available very clearly, and we'll circulate that, of course, to everyone who's attending. Everything must be very clear because the questions are slowing down. Yes, we had budgeted an hour and a half for this webinar, but maybe we'll manage in 1 hour. So just to clarify, the link now for registering is open until the 30th of November. That is right?
Yes, that is correct. The review itself closes on the 12th of December, but you need to register by the 30th in order to be granted access to the materials.
So the materials become available 2 weeks, more or less, 12 days after the registration period closes.
No. They become available from the 17th of October. So anybody can register now. From the 17th of October, they are available until the 12th of December, but you can register up until the 30th of November. After that, the registration closes. No new application will be accepted.
Okay, so then my question is, so from the 17th of October to the 12th of December, the material is available. So the reviewers are expected to do their work between that period. That's right. Yes, okay. So it's only, let's say, a short window where this input is required.
Yes, yeah.
And do the first author draft reviewers typically come back to be second author draft reviewers?
I guess it can happen. Yeah, Andrew, sorry.
No, sorry, carry on, Anna.
No, just saying that basically, I think, yes, there is some sort of consistency. I think those who get quite vested into the contents, they probably come back for the review. But then also you can come in as a new reviewer in the second draft, of course. You're not obliged to have done the steps. But it was just the advice that we thought was helpful that you participate at this stage. There's a drawback in that the chapter is more in the sort of formation. It's being formed as we will review. It's still quite early days, but then your insights could be actually very effective at shaping it. It's and then you can come back later again in the second order draft, and at that point there will also be the first draft of the summary for policymakers. So you'll see the progression of the evidence base and how that then is starting to take shape into the policy document. Yeah, it's a very interesting process.
I question from Amenzi in the chat. I think we covered this a little bit, especially you, Anna. What is in it for the reviewers? Because it's voluntary work. Maybe you could emphasize that again.
Yeah, it's voluntary work, but it's sort of, becoming part of this process. It's you may know some of the authors who are participating in this work, and so it's a supportive mechanism. It's a collective effort to produce these reports. It's quite remarkable, actually, what comes out as a result. And so there's a will between the international science and broader expert community to help bring this knowledge to the policy sphere. Yeah, and if you're, there are many people who could have been authors with really, really topical expertise. The selection is extremely competitive. And so if we imagine that this cohort is available to help these authors and just give them the direction, the suggestions, the ideas, it would make an enormous difference to the work of the authors who were indeed selected. So it's a collective effort. And then you will obviously maybe, though there are times where the review is so, it's bringing something that really is needed by the chapter, that you'll be invited to become a contributing author. And then your name appears in the draft, and your publications may appear in the report and so on. So there's a lot of satisfaction, I would say, in seeing your knowledge being transmitted through.
I think on there, another question has just come through from Bahiro that you just answered. What recognitions can be made for reviewers? So they are listed in the report. There's a question from Amara that appeared above that. Is there any sort of training for the volunteers for reviewing? I imagine you already need to be, as we've said before, at a certain level or a certain understanding of the issues to be able to be invited to be a reviewer. So no specific training is provided. Is that correct?
Not really, beyond what we're sort of explaining here, I would say. I think I give the floor to Andrew, because what the working groups are planning outreach activities to follow on this event, to continue explaining how to participate and how to become an effective reviewer. And the resources obviously from this presentation will be available. And then I think, if you're able to be in contact with an IPCC author from the past, or you could also follow up and get more insights in that way. But I think your feedback also, when you get the actual documents, I think for the IPCC or those of us who try to support the process and the capacity of focal point, it's interesting to hear what would be helpful. I think we could always try to support more the process. But over to Andrew, you have plans already.
The plans that is currently ongoing is different webinars, such as this one, for different regions. We also receiving requests for group reviews, which will be mainly some group of organizations or institutions wanting to work together as a group and submit expert review comments. Beyond that, we don't have any specific training, but if you go to past IPCC report pages, which I put in the chat, you can see examples of past expert review comments, the kind of comments that people provide and the responses that are given to those comments to help in terms of what to look for when you are reviewing a draft report.
Following up a little bit on the training, does everyone accepted to be a reviewer actually provide written feedback in the Excel sheet that you showed, Anna, or it's possible to go there, think, this all looks okay for me. Maybe next time, the next report that comes, then you've gone through the process at least once and received sort of some personal training without actually putting pen to paper, so to speak. I guess that is a possibility and a way to proceed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Couple of other questions coming through. we mentioned the first order draft will be available to people signed up to be reviewers from, if I remember, 17 October to 12 December. The second order draft, more or less, Andrew, what sort of months are we looking at for that to become available?
The second order draft will be available for review sometime around May to July of 2026.
Okay, that answers Diksha's question. And then Lillian, would you say there's any specific expertise that could really help? Which are the topics? She would like to know more on that. Maybe Anna, that comes back to you, your advice to check the contents, but we won't know the specific topics until the first order draft is made public. Is that right?
Well, there's the agreed outline, which I don't know, maybe what we can do after this webinar is just have a summary of all the key links that you can find, where to register, and the other important thing I think could be the outline of the special report, so you could already get a good idea of what's in there. The outline is not the list table of contents because it's then elaborated by authors, but you would get a good idea of where the topics are, in which chapter. Yeah, I would suggest we do that. And there's also a document that accompanied the agreement of the outline, which is produced by the leadership of the IPCC to explain what the intention is in this chapter outline. So that could be useful background for those interested in participating.
Okay, so again, we'll try and put, I think we did it after our first webinar, a sort of fact sheet together, sort of timelines and the critical links, and put everything in one place for everybody. A question from Godwin. What measures have you put in place to ensure that a good number of reviewers are engaged to adequately capture context of climate vulnerability and resistant options in sub-Saharan Africa, in cities, vulnerable hotspots? So various outreach activities like this is one way, but maybe Andrew, you could expand a little bit on that as well.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Godwin. We rely on experts like yourself to be able to elevate those kind of regional specific or context specific information because as Anna said, we have a small group of experts who are involved in writing this report, and they may not have a very broad overview of some nuances or context specific issues. So we rely on your support to spread the information within your network. As I mentioned, there are also other initiatives by bureau members of the IPCC who are selected from different countries and regions who are organizing online webinars as well to create awareness about this review opportunity and to stimulate interest. Yeah, so in such way, I think for Africa, I'm aware there are plans to have about 5 sub-regional webinars with options to also provide some translations, and knowing that there are parts of Africa where English is not the first language. So there are initiatives to bring in as many people as possible to be aware of the process and hopefully to provide their input to the expert review.
Okay, so certainly the idea of IPCC is to be as inclusive as possible. So we've added a couple of links in the chat. I hope everyone can see those. So the outline that Anna mentioned, Julia has put that there, and again, we'll make it available. And Shayla has pointed out that we will gather all this information onto the IAP website, certainly on the events section where you found the link to join the webinar. We'll make sure everything is there afterwards, so all the key information that you need for following up, for registering, the timeline, everything together. I think at this point, I don't see any more questions coming through. If there's any final words from either Anna or Andrew, and then I think we can close.
Well, I leave the last word to Andrew, but I think essentially this is a very, very worthwhile process, and I emphasize the collective approach that is really needed. And having seen this during the course of the sixth assessment cycle, it's really incredibly important to have the expertise coming in and supporting the authors in as an effective way as possible. So I really encourage you to see how you might engage. You're not obliged to, as Peter said. You could also just see whether it's relevant for you and then decide. And then something that maybe we could consider, Peter, Andrew, is to have a mechanism of feedback, from this first iteration of a review. Maybe we could gather some feedback on what kind of training would actually be useful. There could, I think there's a general interest in supporting this process as much as possible, just to bring in the diverse perspectives and so on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Andrew, last words.
My name is Karin Maris.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy for this opportunity and the interest that has been shown. Sorry, there was a question earlier about training that is available. There are some training not produced by IPCC, but some support organizations. So I've been trying to find the links and put them in the chat that people can go through. So I think those will be part of the resource package that goes to the participant at the end of this session. So thank you very much for the invitation. And as I said, happy to see the interest that is there, and looking forward to receiving your review feedback. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Anna. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. Thank you to the participants online. I hope this has been informative for you. And as we've heard in the last few minutes, we'll put together a package of information and make that available for yourselves and others visiting the IAP website and so on. We'll make sure we get that to you as well as participants of this event. So let us close here. Thank you all for your participation. Have a good day.